Well, hello there, do hope you're all well. Well, I know I've done a couple of videos with James O'Brien and when they talk about our Dodgy Dave. But unless something really, really big happens, chances are probably the last one about it. Well, unless our Bodger gets really dragged into it and he's found guilty of doing it himself, well, you just never know. But the one thing I love about LBC, and especially with James O'Brien, is that every so often, not often, but every now and again, you'll get a call from someone who you can tell straight away that this call is going to be really good. I'm going to learn from this person. It's usually within the first 5 seconds you realise when they speak, you know it's time for you to shut that hole in your face and open them sticky things at the side of your head and listen. Up steps Colin. Enjoy.
Colin's in Belton. Colin, what's going on? Why does it work? What's the score?
Well, it's weird. I was talking to a friend and associate of mine who's a psychologist.
Yes.
And we were talking about, because we were wondering, like you do, why sociopaths seem to rise to positions of authority.
This escalated. This escalated.
Yeah, well, it does happen, and there's a very strong case for it. And we were sort of, wheeling it back sort of historically, and why is it that this happens? And one thing that emerged, there's a guy called Daniel Kahneman, who wrote a fantastic book called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow.
Yeah.
And he got the Nobel Prize for his work around this. And basically, there's two forms of thinking. There's one which is what you call system one, which is just your average every day, I'm thinking about X, Y, and Z, what am I going to have for dinner, etc.
Yeah.
Then there's thinking two, system two, which is the really hard stuff. How are we going to solve the environmental crisis, that kind of stuff. Now, historically, what we know about this physiologically is that system two thinking, hard thinking, really does drain your body. It really absolutely is hard stuff.
Yeah.
So we came up with the hypothesis, which is quite a simple one, which is, why do we have a hierarchy as it exists? Will you do all my thinking for me so I don't have to think too hard, because it's uncomfortable and it's unpleasant. Now, take that back a few thousand years. If you're the problem solver and you come up with the good ideas, then you suddenly start to lead them. That has privileges. What's the privileges? Well, you probably get the first cut of meat from the kill, etc.
Yeah.
System 2 thinking demands glucose, which means you have to be well fed. You have to be well looked after to be able to actually even begin to think smart. So we came up with this theory, James, which is we know how to save the world. Which is critical thinking should be on the curriculum for every single school. Because let's be honest, if you thought critically, how many conservative parties would ever get into power?
Well, a lot of people will not like that, and and you understand why. But the what's fascinating about so how do you guard that against accusations of being patronising or sneering? Because you are essentially saying I'm possessed of a faculty that these dozy plebs are not possessed of. I know you're not saying that, but if Dominic Raab was here, he could pretend that you were, and LBC would broadcast it.
No, I understand that, and it sounds horribly patronising.
That's the challenge.
It's not intended that way.
That's the challenge.
It is, but I think it's in our structure. This is the point. I mean, you said something earlier that tickled me, because you talked about the people having a God-given right. I think it was, and of course
that was the old justification for it, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the royal family still do. The idea, the only reason they're there is because God put them there. I mean,
I don't know that the divine right of kings is still a line they'd punt. I think that kind of just trickled out of favour because it would hinge upon the population being devout or being religious, and they're just not anymore. So that can't explain why they're still there. It might explain how they sleep at night. I think I'd find it a lot easier to sleep in a palace if I'd managed to persuade myself that it was all God's idea, rather than the fact that my ancestor was a rather effective warlord, a rather bloodthirsty Norman. But I don't.
But think about it this way, though, James. So let's just say, as an example, you've got people, they've got into positions of power. They like positions of power. They get all of the trappings of that because by luck, their ancestors had some good problem-solving skills. They were quite good at that. So that then propagates its way through. Then eventually you start to say, hang on, And there's a beautiful line. I don't know if you've seen this on Channel 4. It was called The Great, about Catherine the Great. And there's a line in there which absolutely needs up. It was basically the Catherine of Russia wants to open up printing presses and educate the population. They go over to see the King and Queen of Sweden, who did do that. And the Queen of Sweden says, yeah, we did that. Now they're intelligent, they want to kill us. So what would you do with the media? What would you do with the media if you are in positions? So it kind of is a bit of almost a no-brainer to say, well, naturally you're going to have a media that's going to look after the people who are in power.
To sustain the inequality. And if the newspapers happen to be owned by either aristocrats or the latter-day equivalent of aristocrats, i.e. the super-rich, who may well prove to be sociopaths if we had the pleasure of dissecting their personalities, then, of course, they're going to be the ones putting their shoulder to the wheel of perpetuating the inequality. Someone sent me an article. We must have touched onto similar territory to the ones you've been exploring with your pal, because someone sent me an article about how much of the current, what would we call them? I don't know, the ruling class or whatever it may be, how many of them trace their lineage back to the Norman invasion? And of course, because up until that point, you and I owned, not that we were around in 1066, Colin, but had we been on these islands, we could have owned some land. But after the Norman invasion, nobody did. William the Conqueror owned every single blade of grass, and then he started dishing it out to his mates. And that, oddly, and I'll dig the article out, because I think it was about 5 years old, I couldn't believe my eyes. Because I love the story about the old Duke of Westminster, the previous Duke of Westminster being asked, because he ended up in that position somewhat reluctantly, not unlike the last king. It was a sort of accident of lineage and early death. And someone asked him for advice on being really, really rich. And he said, reportedly, and I hope not apocryphally, that the best advice I can give you is to have an ancestor who was great chums with William the Conqueror. And I used to really laugh about that. And I still do chuckle, but it's a very wry chuckle now because it's just true. And yet, how much of this country has been persuaded that status quo is absolutely fine? Neil Rankin, the chef, has been in touch to suggest that a lot of it is people don't want Cameron to get away with gaming the system, but perhaps most people want to be able to game it themselves. So there's that element as well.
Now that's interesting because there's another way of looking at this. Human beings appear to have an innate sense of fairness. So, there's good research on this. If you look at some of the game theory stuff, especially where there was one piece that was really interesting. Just think about this because it's got breaks.
Shorter time. You're going to have to do it in a bite-sized nugget.
Here it goes.
Yeah.
So two people are in a room. One person's told you got $100 and you can share as much with the other person in the other room as you like.
Yeah.
But if the other person disagrees, nobody gets anything. Over 70% of the people went 50-50 and everybody did it. Some people put £10 in.
That's self-interest as much as it's fairness. Oh, we're having a philosophical conundrum.
Yeah, well, no, it's innate sense of fairness. But what happened with less than 30%? What happened was people said no deal. I would rather have you in pain not getting your 70 than me getting the 30. Does that sound familiar?
Okay. Whoa. And now, I historically at this point, I tell everybody to read up on John Rawls's Veil of Ignorance, which plays into all of the territory that Colin has just been so expertly describing. To go back to Neil briefly, when you vote in favour of a system you think will benefit you at the expense of others, it's hypocritical to condemn those for whom it does actually benefit. And there it is. That's why we got culture wars. You're voting to hurt other people. I love being lied to because it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan. Therefore, you've been perfectly primed, groomed, gaslit, call it what you will, to greenlight your, quotes, betters behaving abominably because, A, it upsets people like me and Sadiq Khan. That's a phrase from a caller from a couple of years ago, unless you think I've gone weird. And B, if the boot was on the other foot, you'd love nothing more than to ride roughshod over morality, regulation and law in the way that the people you currently tug your forelock at and doff your cap towards do every day. Ooh, there are moments when I feel that we are challenging the very parameters of traditional talk radio.
As soon as I heard Colin say, I was having a conversation about this with my psychology friend. My ears pricked up and he had my full attention. And the bit about thinking fast, thinking slow was absolutely fascinating. And that bit about, in history, those who were doing the apparent difficult thinking would get the first cut of the meat of the kill was a proper penny drop moment for me because it never dawned on me that way. But he's spot on when he says critical thinking should be on the curriculum for every school, because no critical thinking person would ever vote for this extreme Tory government. And the conversation about tackling the media was eye-opening. The Catherine the Great story was brilliant too. It was really, really intelligent way to talk about it. But that $100 experiment really knocked me out of the park. Damn, he was good. But then 10 minutes later, up steps someone who clearly lacks critical thinking. Here comes Joe.
Oh, I hope we haven't gone to the phones like Nick did earlier. Joe's in Bexley. Joe, what would you like to say?
I just had a little point that you made earlier about David Cameron. I just wanted to sort of chip in on that. You were saying to, I believe it was another geezer that you were speaking to, that we basically own his experience, and that the sales director of the company that he was referring to had worked his way up. Well, I would argue that David Cameron worked his way up to become Prime Minister as well.
Yeah, but this is, I don't know how much of the conversation you heard. It hinged upon the question of who elected the European sales director.
But he, like you say, he done it through hard work. But then I would say David Cameron got into a position of power from hard work to be able to be elected. Okay. That would be my argument.
And it's an interesting argument. Did you know that his family arranged for him to meet the Queen when he was a younger man because he'd been earmarked as somebody who might enjoy success in public life?
Listen, I understand that someone like myself and someone like David Cameron come from very different backgrounds.
Did you genuinely keen to know, Joe? Did you know that? Did you know that he'd had a meeting with the Queen arranged?
No, I didn't know that. But
and his mother-in-law phoned the head of a television company to get him his first job in PR.
Yeah, but it's so you know, my mum got me a job as an apprentice surveyor when I was 16.
Yeah.
She's a secretary at surveyors. It's all about who you know, no matter what walk of life. Like the geezer said before.
Exactly, and Prime Minister should be exempt from that.
But not really, because
no, really, it absolutely has to be exempt from that. Why do you think there are? No, not in my opinion, mate. It's the ministerial code. If he'd been an independent lobbyist working on a contract for this outfit that went bankrupt, leaving aside,
why has he been arrested then?
Well, I haven't finished speaking yet, but he wasn't. He was on the actual payroll. And if he's so good, how did he end up working for a company that went bankrupt?
I personally don't like David Cameron, so that's not my point, right? I don't.
No, your point is we'd all do it if we could, so fair play to him.
100%. Listen, I'm telling you now, if someone rang me up in my current job at the moment, I do sales, right?
Yeah.
If someone rang me up and told me I could get a nice little earner on the side through putting someone on a phone call with another person, similar to what David Cameron has done with these power brokers, like you've said, I'm telling you now, the money would be in my bank by the end of the week.
I don't doubt it for a minute. You're wrong about the second bit. There's plenty of people who, I don't want to insult you, but there's plenty of people who would not behave immorally, even though it might have been technically correct.
I don't think it's necessarily immoral, though. I think that he's using his network of people.
Why do you think it's? Why do you think it's on? Why do you think if he's not done anything wrong? Why do you think it's on all the front pages at the moment? Especially given that all the newspapers support the Conservative Party and supported his hard work-based journey into Downing Street.
No, I don't agree with that either. I don't think all the newspapers necessarily support the Conservative Party.
Well, apart from the Mirror and the Guardian.
All right, and what about the Independent?
It's not a newspaper anymore.
Is it not?
It's just a website. But that wasn't the point, was it? The question I was asking you was, why is it on all the front pages if he's not done anything wrong?
Immoral. It might be slightly immoral, but like you're saying, that they think that it's against maybe fair play. But I don't.
Well, there you go. And all I'm saying is, I completely respect you ringing up to say that you don't believe in fair play, but you must accept that millions of people do.
I just think it's quite contradictory, especially in London, in a time where you have people like black cab drivers who have been absolutely blown out of the water by people like Uber. And that was complete unfair play, just undercutting, using cheap labour when they have to go through
We've made all of these points. The question, very simply, is I don't think we're even arguing with us. In a way, I respect your honesty, but you have to acknowledge that lots and lots of people believe in fair play, including myself, which is, of course, why I've argued furiously that Uber shouldn't have been allowed to ride roughshod over the terms and conditions that cab drivers signed up for. But you, of course, you'd be getting the Uber money in a flash, wouldn't you? Like you just said.
No, but what
but you literally just said you would. You'd be signing up. You'd be in the bank your bank account by tea time.
It's completely different, though, isn't it?
Apparently, yes.
The one thing that struck me about Joe was when James tugged at his theory that apparently our Dodgy Dave got where he got through hard work with simple questions, he started saying, "Listen, I understand that," instead of just saying, "No, I didn't know that." And the line about his mum getting him an apprenticeship is just the same as Dodgy Dave's mum ringing a TV station to get him a job in PR, even though I found it quite sweet in a way, but laughable as well, unfortunately, because quite a lot of difference. If not for the prestige, but for the pay packet as well. And when he thinks it's only James's opinion and not the ministerial code as to whether Dodgy Dave has done anything wrong, just sums up the whole conversation for me. But to one minute say anybody else in his position would have done exactly the same and then cry victimhood for the black cab drivers was just so pant-wettingly ridiculous. And also the bit where he thought he had a zinger about the Independent was hilarious. But to say, "Oh, that's different," when he gets his hypocrisy called out about saying he'd do exactly the same as Dodgy Dave, while claiming that situation under Uber and the black cabs is a disgrace, is exactly the reason why Colin was right about one thing, about critical thinking should be on the school curriculum. But anyway, I shall leave the video here. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. And I will be having a little extended weekend myself due to the fact that on Sunday, it's mine and my beloved's 20th wedding anniversary. So I shall be spending some quality time with my soulmate. So if I'm not back Tuesday, be definitely Wednesday. So I shall bid you farewell. Take care.